After a 5-year hiatus, Kratos is now coming back with God of War making its PS4 debut. And things are looking very different. Gone is the fixed camera. Gone, the Greek mythological setting. Gone, the Spartans' trademark chained blades. The upcoming sequel, titled simply God of War, seems to be a more thoughtful, intimate, and mature take on the series. And as such, a lot of things are going to be changing. In this feature, we're going to take a look at 15 of what we feel are the most vital pieces of information you need to know about this game. We have plenty to talk about, so let's jump right in. Unchained combat. The series has become synonymous with Kratos' chained yo-yo blades over the years, so it came as a bit of a shock when it was first revealed that the upcoming PS4 sequel would see the Spartan sporting a much different kind of weaponry. In the upcoming game, the Spartan will be equipped with an axe, called the Leviathan, and a shield, which means that combat is probably going to be very, very different from what fans of the series might be used to. Interestingly, Kratos will also be able to throw his axe at his enemies and then summon it back into his hands, kind of like Thor and his hammer. And in the time that he's without his axe, he'll be pummeling his enemies with his shield and fists. That said, we're just hoping that there's still a square-square-triangle combo somewhere in there. And who knows, maybe the chained blades might just end up making an appearance. Spartan Rage. Kratos is an angry guy. In other news, water is wet, and we've also just been told that Mario's a plumber. But no, seriously, Kratos' rage is so much more than just an over-exaggerated character trait. His rage has been an important gameplay mechanic in the games for years, serving as short bursts of near invincibility and extreme power. That feature, at least, isn't disappearing completely. Just like in the previous games, pressing down simultaneously on both analog sticks at certain times in the game will allow Kratos to unleash his Spartan rage, and we can't wait to see what it'll look and feel like. Dynamic environments. Environments are also going to play an important role in combat. While in the previous games it was all about Kratos' weapons and magical abilities, this time around players will also be able to make use of their environments to gain an edge over their foes. From pinning enemies to the walls with your axe, to throwing your axe at hazards in the environments for area of effect attacks, combat in the upcoming game promises to be more dynamic and reactive than ever before. Atreus. Of course, the biggest change the game is going to introduce is the fact that Kratos now has a son. Atreus is going to be accompanying Kratos throughout the game, and while he's obviously going to be vital for the narrative, his involvement is also going to change the way you play the game itself severely as well. Kind of like Ellie in The Last of Us. During combat, there's going to be a button dedicated entirely to Atreus, which will allow him to stun and attack enemies in order to help his father. Bosses. Boss battles are, of course, one of the series' biggest strengths. From the Hydra and the Colossus of Rhodes to Poseidon and Kronos, these set-piece epic encounters have always been a highlight of these games, and that much, at least, isn't going to change, according to the developers at the very least. Of course, with the fixed camera being replaced with a free-moving, over-the-shoulder approach, boss battles are going to be different, but we're expecting the same level of quality in terms of design and how cinematic and visceral they're going to be. Optional bosses. What's interesting though is that the game is also going to feature boss battles that are entirely optional. This game isn't going to be open world, but it's going to have optional dungeons and areas for players to tackle, and many of these will feature boss encounters. Given the series' penchant for delivering one stunning boss battle after another, we're quite excited to see what these optional encounters are going to look like. Maybe Sony Santa Monica should be taking cues from something like Final Fantasy XV. The optional boss fights in that game were perhaps the highlights of the entire experience. Puzzles. Puzzle solving has always been an important part of the series' gameplay loop. Admittedly, puzzles in the series have never been on the same level as something like The Legend of Zelda, but then again, they were never meant to be. And though the focus on puzzles has diminished with each successive game in the series, things are probably going to be a little different in the upcoming game. Given the fact that it's a much larger and more open game, and the fact that the experience seems to be leaning toward the action-adventure genre, more than its much more action-oriented predecessors were, we're assuming that puzzles will be much more of a focus this time around than they have been in the past. Exploration. Similarly, exploration also seems to be playing an important role in the upcoming sequel. As we've already discussed, while the game isn't going to be an open world game, it is going to be a much less linear and driven experience than its predecessors, complete with optional areas and bosses and everything else that comes with those elements. But just how much of a focus on exploration will the game have? Well, that much remains to be seen. No more swimming. Swimming sections have always been a pretty big deal in the series. Underwater traversal, underwater puzzles, and even some underwater exploration has always been a part of these games. So it's a little surprising that there will be no swimming sections in the new game. This has mostly been done to facilitate Atreus' inclusion in the game. And once again, this seems to have a lot of shades of Ellie in The Last of Us in it, even though that game did have a little bit of swimming going on. So how exactly will Kratos and Atreus traverse water in this game? Boats. Genius, right? Some real outside-the-box thinking here, traversing water with a boat. Jokes aside though, boats are actually going to function quite interestingly in this game. Sections where Kratos and Atreus are on the boat will serve, more than anything else, narrative purposes, with the two characters conversing with each other about various things and giving us a window into their thoughts. Game director Cory Balrog did mention in the past that these sections make up about 30% of the game, and even though later on he went on to retract that statement, the fact remains that boats are probably going to be a pretty big part of God of War. No jump button. Well, here's another big one, no more jumping. Jump and double jump were at the core of so much of what the previous games did. Platforming and traversal were centered around these simple mechanics, while aerial combos during combat were also made possible by these moves. The latest entry, however, isn't gonna have the jump button. We're curious to see how this is gonna work out. What does it mean for all the platforming and how does this affect the combat? Traversal, of course, will also be quite different. Crafting and upgrading. Upgrading your weapons and abilities has always been part of the series' gameplay loop, but the upcoming sequel is going to take that one step further, with the inclusion of light RPG elements, from experience points to crafting mechanics. Players will also be able to use the rune slots in Kratos' axe to add elemental damage to their attacks, for instance. And while we're also curious to see whether or not upgrading weapons and abilities will be similar to what fans of the series might be familiar with. Just how in-depth will this mechanic be though? Well, we'll find out soon enough. Length. Other than the considerably shorter PSP titles, the past games have usually been pretty long. While the first game in the series could be finished in about 8 hours, subsequent installments were all at least 10 hours long. The upcoming entry though is going to be much longer. With the addition of exploration and so much optional side content, that was kind of bound to happen. But as per game director Cory Balrog, the estimated 25 to 30 hour running time of this game exceeded even Sony Santa Monica's expectations. Continuity. God of War is going to function as a sort of soft reboot for the series, and while it's true that a lot's going to be different, that doesn't mean the game is going to be completely sweeping away everything that's come before it. The franchise and the character of Kratos have a long, rich history, and the upcoming game is going to be making use of that. This is very much a continuation, in spite of all the changes going around, and from the trailer we've seen so far, it looks like the game will allude to several important things from Kratos' past. Let's just hope that we get a proper segue from the last game's ending as well. PS4 Pro. Each game in the franchise so far has pushed the hardware that it's been on to its absolute limits, and judging by everything that we've seen so far, this game looks absolutely stunning as well. We have no doubt in our minds that it's going to be one of the best looking PS4 games ever. But what about the PS4 Pro? Well, when played on a 4K TV, the game runs in a dynamic 4K resolution, meaning 2160p checkerboarding technology. 1080p TV owners will also benefit from super sampling. And what's more, the game will also support HDR.
And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.